Tonight, the vote will decide if the town I love survives, and whether the man I can't stop thinking about walks away my rival or the person I finally hold. I've fought Tyrell in public for months. Now someone wants us both silenced. I'm in love with my enemy, completely. I didn't fall for Tyrell in any clean, cinematic way. It wasn't a lightning strike. It was slower, messier, more like the stubborn drift of a river you think you understand, until it bends in a way that surprises you. Even now, with the council chambers humming and the faces of our neighbors lined up on folding chairs, I can hear the soft creak of the building settling and feel the truth settle in me. I'm in love with him. And I don't know how to stop. It's an odd moment to notice something like love. The town hall smells like old paper, dust, and the faint tang of strong coffee. The flags droop a little on their poles, as if they, too, are tired of weeks of arguing. The chairs squeal when someone shifts. Outside, the courthouse oak trees stand like old men with their arms thrown wide, sheltering us the way they always have. Those oaks, those are what we've been fighting over. Per Willow Creek tradition, the spring council meeting has run long, because it always does. People here like to be heard. When you live in a place where the sky opens wide above you and the roads run straight through soybean fields, you learn the comfort of a shared conversation. You also learn how sharp it can get when something dear is at stake. The thing at stake now is the old Hale Community Center with its creaking gym floor and sun-faded mural, and the green space around it crowned by the oaks. The developer's proposal, his proposal, would level the center and most of the trees to make way for a gleaming complex of condominiums, retail, and a glass-walled co-working hub. Job growth, they say. New tax base, they say. A better future. And it would be easier if the proposal came from some anonymous firm out of Dallas or Atlanta, but it hasn't. It came from Tyrell. The first time I argued with him, I did it in front of half the town. I was still thinking I could keep things personal separate from the fight. And then I opened my mouth and realized nothing was separate anymore. That night, he stood at the front of the room in a grey suit that looked like it had been pressed by angels and talked for 30 minutes without notes. He was all competence and polish, the kind that comes from leaving here for a while and making it in a city with tall buildings and noise that doesn't sleep, then bringing it all back home. I know the history, he said. I played ball on that warped gym floor. I used to race my brother around those oaks until our socks were green. This is not about forgetting. It's about building a future we can live in. When he finished, the room murmured. He had that effect. He always did. I waited for the applause to die, and then stood up from a metal chair that bit the back of my legs. My palms were sweating, but I thought about Mrs. Larkin and the blood pressure check she got at the clinic tucked inside the community center. About the summer literacy program that kept kids safe and busy when the heat made tempers short and patience shorter. I thought about my father years ago after his stroke, shuffling down that hallway with my arm around him, waving to volunteers who greeted him like royalty. What about the part where the clinic is gone? I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. What about the kids who ride their bikes there and learn how to read under those trees? You talk about a future we can live in. Some of us are living now. He looked at me. Really looked. That was the first thing that confused me about Tyrell. We could spar, and he would still look at you, like he knew you were a person with a story. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't sigh. He just tilted his head a little, the way he does when he's considering a tricky shot at the pool table. We have plans to relocate the clinic, he said. We're adding a courtyard with new plantings. It's a better use of space, Benjamin. It startled me to hear my name in his mouth. It wasn't just the syllables. It was the way he softened the last two, turned them over, made them less stiff, more like something you could wear. It's not better if we're counting use as the measure for an oak that has been here longer than any of us, I said. It's not better if families have to cross the highway to reach a clinic because you put it by the gas station. We went back and forth, and it was careful because there were cameras rolling, and we both cared how our mothers might feel watching later. But after the meeting, when most of the chairs had been stacked and the janitor was winging his broom in long, tired arcs, I walked out into the cool March night and found a sheet of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. It wasn't a parking ticket. It wasn't a flyer. It was a single-type sentence that bled into me like cold water. "Shut up or you will be made to." I stood there under the street lamp with its yellow halo, reading the sentence 3 times, as if a different meaning might appear on a later pass. A car passed down Main Street, radio low, the tail lights receding like 2 lazy eyes. I looked around, no one. I looked back at the note. My heart did that tricky thing it does when it remembers an old fear and tries it on like a jacket you thought you donated. Then I laughed, too loud, because sometimes I laugh when I feel my stomach turn to ice. When I lifted my head, Terrell was leaning against the brick not 10 feet away watching me. I hadn't heard him come out. His tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone, his jacket folded over his arm like a patient. He looked different without the podium between us. Smaller somehow. More human. "You okay?" he asked. His voice was lower when it wasn't filling a room. "Do you need something?" I asked back, too sharp. I didn't want to find anything like kindness in him. It would complicate us. It already was. He pointed with his chin, a gentle move that didn't point at all but suggested. "Your windshield." I reached back and slid the note into my jacket pocket. "I'm fine, Benjamin," he said. And there it was again, that gentle way he made my name feel less like a stiff shirt and more like a sweater. "If someone is threatening you, you should tell Sheriff Dorset." This from the man who wants to pave over the past, I said. Because sometimes the only way to hold back a different feeling is to lean harder on the one you came in with. His mouth crooked up at the right corner. "So that's a no. What do you care?" I asked. He blinked, and for a second I saw something that didn't look like politics. It looked older and thinner and more tender than anything I'd let myself imagine with him. Then he was back in motion, pulling his keys from his pocket and rolling his shoulders as if to shake off a thought. "You probably think I wrote it. I didn't say that. You didn't have to." He looked at me more squarely now, not hiding how tired he was. "I didn't. And for what it's worth, I don't want you to shut up." He got into his car and drove away. I stood there long enough for the street lamp to hum and for my breath to catch up. I grew up in this town. I teach at the high school now. English to kids whose grandparents know mine. Kids who've sat under the same oaks and cheered the same teams. I moved away for a few years, sure. I tried on a skyline and streets clogged with taxis and places where no one knew anyone when they said good morning. I came back when my father needed me, and then I stayed because love is a lot of things, and one of them is staying. Terrell left too. He left right after graduation for a school with money and prestige we whispered about like it was a movie actor. He came back when his father got sick, and he stayed through a long winter where everything felt grey, and then his father died in a spring that smelled like rain and turned the fields the colour of a brand new leaf. He didn't rush away again. He took a job with the county development office, then started his own firm. He could have lived anywhere. He picked here. That complicates a tidy story where he's the villain. Lots of things complicate tidy stories. He and I are the same age, more or less, with a history that's neither simple nor dramatic. In high school, we were more orbit than collision. He ran track. I edited the school paper and wrote too many poems about clouds. We knew of each other, traded nods, not friendships. We'd end up at the same diners sometimes, the same holiday parades, that small-town way of moving through life in overlapping circles that never quite drew close enough to become one. Until now. In the weeks after that first meeting, the town divided itself into camps. And because we are decent people pretending to be better people, we did it with signs planted neatly in front lawns and careful conversations at the grocery store. "Save the oaks," my side read. "Grow Willow Creek," his said. It was all polite until it wasn't. Someone keyed my car. Someone else threw paint on a developer's banner. Someone slid another note under my door one evening that simply said, "Enough." I was carrying that word around when I saw him at Dinah's Diner on a Friday night. He was alone at the counter, reading the sports page while he waited for his order. His hair was messy in a way that wasn't planned, like he'd run his hands through it and forgot to put it exactly back. He was wearing an old college sweatshirt I wouldn't have expected him to keep. The waitress, Loretta, who's been handing out pie with the same no-nonsense tenderness since I was 12, refilled his coffee and patted his shoulder. He smiled up at her like he meant it. I stood there by the toothpick dispenser, contemplating escape. It would have been simple to turn around. Instead, I heard my voice. "You like the cherry," I said. "That surprises me." He looked up, blinking, and then his smile found me. "I do. You're a blueberry person, aren't you?" "Guilty?" "Too sweet," he said. "Not if it's done right, and who's to say what right is?" I laughed, and it came out low and warm, and I didn't mean it to. Loretta caught my eye from the other end of the counter and tipped her head toward the empty stool next to him. It was the same expression she used when two people came in crying and left in a better mood with matching styrofoam containers. I slid onto the stool. "It was foolish. It was kind. I heard you've been getting messages," he said as soon as my coffee landed. "How?" He took a sip and didn't answer. The silence wasn't defiant. It was careful. "Terrell," I said. My voice put his name together differently, clipped and careful, like I didn't want to taste it too long. "If you had wanted to intimidate me, you would have done it in public where the cameras could see it. I don't." He stared into his cup. "We disagree about this plan. We're on opposite teams right now." "That's true, but I don't want you scared." "You don't want me, period," I said lightly. "Light for safety. Light like a porch lamp that keeps raccoons away." "You don't get to pick my adjectives." He drummed his fingers once. "Fair." We ate in a silence that felt almost companionable. When his cherry pie arrived, the filling glossy and red, he slid his plate halfway toward me. "Here," he said. "Try again. See if it's been done right." I took a forkful. It was better than I liked to admit. I gave it a little nod and slid it back. His half-smile widened. "I appreciate a man who concedes ground with dignity. I appreciate a man who doesn't need to win every inch." He looked straight at me then. Those eyes that keep more weather in them than any forecast can catch. And something opened between us like a screen door in a breeze. It was small. It was plain. It was gentle. Then Loretta came by with the pot and said, "More?" And the door clicked shut. And we were back to two men at a counter with two different yard signs in our front lawns. That night gave me something the notes couldn't take. It gave me a person where I had been keeping a position. It made the days that followed even harder. The storm came 2 weeks later. The kind of spring thunderstorm that gathers itself on the horizon like a long memory and then runs its fingers across your scalp. The warnings buzzed on our phones, and the sky turned that greenish color that makes even the most stubborn farmer step inside. Rain pummeled the streets. The oaks bent and held and sighed. Power flickered and went down in pockets. I thought about the community center as soon as the wind picked up. The generator has been fickle since the winter, and the basement takes water like a bad habit. I waited until the rain softened a hair and grabbed my keys. My father would have called it foolish, but he would have understood why I did it. Willow Creek at night smells like wet earth and the faint copper memory of old pennies. The road to the center runs past the Little League fields and the new dog park that still looks like it was drawn with a ruler. I parked close. The building was dark apart from a faint glow near the back, like someone had left a lamp on and shut the door. I went around to the side entrance and found it ajar. My heart ticked once, hard, and then settled into a fast rhythm that didn't feel like fear so much as attention. Inside, water knocked against the north windows. Somewhere in the building, something dripped with steady patience. I could smell damp paper and mop water and the sweet faint rot of a fruit forgotten in a locker. "Hello?" I called, because I'm a person who believes in announcing himself to both friends and ghosts. A beam of light hit the floor a few feet ahead of me, then found my shoes. It lifted to my face, and I put up my hand. "Benjamin?" the voice asked. Not surprised exactly. It sounded tired. It sounded like the day had been long. "Terrell," I said, and somehow in that dark and that storm, my voice softened his name without permission. He came out from a doorway, one of those utility closets where we keep dehumidifiers that have paid their dues 3 times over. He had a flashlight in one hand, a file box in the other. His shirt sleeves were rolled, and there was a streak of dust on his cheekbone, like a crooked blessing. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Trying to keep the records dry," he said, lifting the box a little, his eyes clumsy with apology. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Before they're thrown away. Before construction. Before destruction. We both heard all the befores at once. Something tightened in my chest, and I wanted to ask him 100 questions, including the sky-wide one. Why do I want to touch your face when everything about you makes me bristle? I settled for, "Do you need help?" He nodded once. "If you're willing." We worked quick and careful, passing boxes down the hall like a fire brigade. It wasn't lost on me that we were doing what people used to do in this town, when fires were fought with buckets and hope. The rain pushed harder against the windows. Somewhere a branch slammed and then fell, a clean, wet sound of surrender. We had almost finished when I heard glass break. It was sharp and small, like a fist-sized window. Terrell spun, the flashlight beam jerking, and we both saw the yellow bloom of flames curl at the bottom of the office door. The kind of fear that finds you in a moment like that is not cinematic. It is practical and thin. It made me think of the fire extinguisher 2 doors down, and the bucket under the mop sink, and the way smoke eats sight. It did not give me time to be brave. It gave me just enough time to act. "Extinguisher," I said, pointing. Terrell was already moving. He tore the unit from the wall, the metal scream of its brackets drowned by the storm. I grabbed the bucket and slapped the mop into it and ran water as fast as the old pipes would allow. He aimed for the base of the flames, just like the safety posters tell you, and I dumped water along the threshold where they licked. When the foam took, the fire hesitated, then hissed, then died by inches. The smoke was a sour smell that clung to our tongues. We stood there, panting, and looked at each other for a long second. Up close, his eyes were darker than I expected. There was a small cut across his forearm, beading red, where a sliver of glass had found him in the flurry. "You're bleeding," I said, and the words came out from someplace older than argument. "It's nothing," he said. But when I reached and set my fingers gently on his arm, he didn't pull away. We cleaned it the way people do who have learned 100 small, important things from their parents. I found the first aid kit where it always lives, behind the sink. He held his arm up and watched me dab. My hands shook a little, not from fear. "From something else? What are you thinking?" he asked, voice soft, as if a loud word might break the thread. That I'm tired of notes that say enough when what they mean is be quiet. That I should hate you and I don't. That I'm in over my head. I set the bandage. That I can't believe anyone would want to burn this place. He looked at the office door, blackened at the bottom, foam sliding down it in slow, dirty streaks. I don't think it was just anyone. We both looked back toward the side door. The rain had finally begun to lighten, like a person catching their breath. The flashlight beam shivered along the wet floor and caught a small object near the threshold. A lighter. Plain, silver, the kind you thumb open with a flick. Terrell picked it up with a corner of his shirt, touched the lid with his thumb, and then turned it so I could see the initials etched into the side. Neat and shallow. CP, I didn't need to say the name. We both heard it. Councilman Carson Pell. Easy smile, easy money. A way of shaking your hand that always felt like a possession, more than a greeting. He'd backed the development with a fervor that flattered the cameras. He was also the man who had stopped me in the grocery aisle 3 days earlier and said, with his teeth bared in a smile, "You've got passion, son, but passion is a flame. Be careful you don't burn yourself." I swallowed. I think someone wants this building gone," he said. "One way or another." The rest of the night unfolded with the quiet choreography of good neighbors. We called the fire department. They came with their truck and their calm. They noted the fire had been small and mostly contained. They frowned at the lighter and wrote notes and said they'd follow up. Sheriff Dorset came by and pushed his hat back and asked where we were when the flames bloomed and why. We told the truth. We told it plainly. When he asked why Terrell was at the community center in the first place, I wanted to watch the shape of the answer on his face. To save the records, I said. And listen to how that sounded. For the development, the sheriff prompted. Terrell held my eyes. For the people who belong to them. I went home with damp sleeves and a heart that felt too big for my chest. I stood in my kitchen where my mother used to braid dough for Sunday rolls and tried to breathe steadily. Outside, the rain softened into a whisper. I took the notes from my pocket and set them under the ceramic bowl where I kept my spare keys. I thought about leaving town. I thought about staying and being louder. I thought about Terrell's forearm, the bead of blood like a pinprick ruby, and the way his voice fell when he said, "For the people who belong to them." I did not sleep well. The next morning, my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. No words, an attachment. I hesitated, then opened it. It was a scan of a page, crisp and black and white, the kind of document you see when lawyers are involved. At the top, memorandum of understanding. In the middle, a clause that read like legalese, and then, once your eyes found the shape of it, made your stomach drop. If the community center property is damaged by fire or other act of God prior to demolition, the developer and the county reserve the right to proceed with expedited removal. The email address below said, concerned@neighborpostmail.com. I put my coffee down carefully and called the sheriff. Then, without telling myself I shouldn't, I called Terrell. "I've seen it," he said before I could explain, his voice tinny with too much motion. "Come to my office." His building sits on the corner where the hardware store used to be, the kind of brick rectangle that can't help but hold memory. The glass door is always clean. The receptionist is the kind of woman who can wrangle a calendar and a toddler, and a wayward city councilman with equal grace. She waved me through to the back, where he stood at his desk with 3 different stacks of paper and a pen still in his hand, as if stopping to breathe was something he'd put off until later. "Pell," he said without ceremony. "He's got this salted with benefits for himself. Shell companies, kickbacks. I couldn't prove it. I can now. You mean if we can connect that lighter and the clause," he said. "And some payments I'm about to show you that came through the Chamber of Commerce and then took a detour into a company that does not exist." "We?" I said, not to pick a fight. To be careful, he paused. Maybe he heard the way the word both warmed and worried me. He straightened. "I didn't come back here to pull this kind of... What am I trying to say?" He rubbed his eyes and exhaled. "I came back here because I still believe in the things my grandmother told me sitting on a porch swing. We belong to each other," she'd say, like it was the password for the whole world. I thought I could make something good and honest and still grow us. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I trusted the wrong people. Maybe I trusted the right idea with the wrong plan. But I am not going to let him torch the center and call it progress. He had never said that out loud. Something like regret, something like apology. The room seemed to tilt a fraction, like the horizon he'd been standing on shifted and brought him closer to me without either of us moving. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. He handed me a folder. "You still know people who remember the past better than a ledger does. Someone will have something that ties Pell to those payments. I'll chase the paperwork. You bring me the part that doesn't live on a form. It is strange how quickly your enemies can become your allies when the thing in front of you feels bigger than a yard sign." The next 2 days were a quiet fever. I went to Mrs. Larkin first. She wasn't just my neighbor. She was the living archive of this town. She remembered weddings by the cake flavors and council votes by the color of the ties. She sat me down, fed me a cinnamon roll like she used to when I was 10, and told me exactly how many times Carson Pell had done a favor for a certain business owner who, as it turns out, also happens to own a blocked-up company listed on the developer's paperwork. She found me a flyer from 3 years ago with Pell's signature championing a fast-track partnership that looked, in the light of our new knowledge, like a funnel for money. I went to the Veterans Outreach Center, where Terrell volunteers on Tuesdays in quiet ways that don't end up in the paper. I didn't mean to see him there, but I did, and he was kneeling in front of an old man with a sweater vest the color of cream, helping him with a smartphone like it was a piece of delicate china. When he looked up and saw me, he didn't stand. He smiled the same smile he'd given me in the diner, and then went back to showing the man how to increase the font size on his messages. I brought him receipts and memories and names. He brought me contracts and routing numbers and maps. When we sat together in his office with the blinds half closed against the afternoon sun, I could feel the townspeople passing on the sidewalk outside. Sometimes we leaned close enough for our shoulders to touch when we pointed at the same line. Sometimes I felt the way his breath caught when he realized the arrow he'd drawn connected two dots he hadn't been willing to see together. Sometimes our eyes met and then skittered away as if we were both 17 again and translating each other from a distance. The night before the vote, the anonymous email lit up our phones again. A single sentence this time, like a blessing. "You'll want to look under Pell's campaign filing from last June." We did. We found a donation from a company with a name that sounded like a sunlit suburb, Greenbrook Holdings, registered to a P.O. box 3 counties over. We followed it to a deed transfer for a parcel right across from the community center, land that would jump in value the minute the development broke ground. We followed it to a cousin of Pell's. We followed it, and each thing we found made a picture that wasn't quite finished until you stood back. Then it was unmistakable. Greed dressed like growth, the mean kind. The kind that thinks your home is just a line item on a quarterly report. We met at the river at dusk. It's the place the town uses for quiet. The water moves slow there. The cottonwoods draw a delicate pattern against the sky. My father used to sit on the bench and listen to me read my poems, giving each one the same serious look he gave the mechanic when the car made a noise. As if everything important deserves a listening ear. "I have to ask you," I said, when we stood together. "Did you know? Not about the fire, about Pell, about the clause." He let out a long breath. "I knew the clause was there. It's a standard cover your bases clause. I didn't imagine someone would use it like a crowbar." He looked away. "As for Pell, no. I wanted to believe he was helping because he believed. I wanted this to be the good kind of big. I was too willing to read it that way. Honesty, I've learned, often feels like a stone in your hand. It has weight. It has shape. It sits there, not flashy, and demands you know it for what it is. His honesty laid itself between us like that. I picked it up. "Okay," I said. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't a speech. It was a place to stand. We sat on the bench. He told me about the first week after his father died, how the house felt like a museum where you're not sure you're allowed to touch anything. I told him about the week after my father's stroke, when I learned how to cook eggs one-handed and how to listen when frustration was the only language either of us could speak. He laughed and said he couldn't believe I'd chosen to stay when the city had its lights on for me. I told him lights don't mean much if no one you love is there to flip them with you. He looked at my mouth in a way that made me feel seen and found and almost shy. I looked at his hands and thought about what it means, at any age, to relearn how to trust your fingers. We didn't kiss. We sat with the slow river and let it try our names out in our mouths. We went home, each carrying a part of something we hadn't expected to find. The day of the vote, the town hall was full before the doors opened. People wore Sunday clothes like they do when they want to show respect, even if their voices will be loud. The air had that charged feeling of a storm, even with the sky outside a clear, honest blue. Pell stood near the front, tie the color of money. He saw me and grinned. He saw Terrell and made a show of clapping him on the shoulder, man to man. I watched Terrell not flinch and felt something like pride, which was odd to feel about a man I was supposed to oppose. The council called us to order. They were tired. You could see it. The mayor cleared her throat. And then Terrell stood and did the thing he knows how to do. He talked. But it wasn't like the first time. He didn't sell. He told the truth. "I brought you a plan because I believed in it," he said. "I still believe we need to grow. I still believe jobs and new houses matter. But I also believe the way we do things matters more than the things we do." In the last 2 weeks, it's become clear that some of the groundwork for this development isn't just flawed. It's corrupt, a hush. The whisper that ran through the room wasn't outrage. It was a careful leaning forward. Go on then. He presented the documents. He had blown up the scan of the clause so it could be read by a person in the last row. He put the donation chain up on the projector, names and numbers and arrows that made a picture even without his words. He spoke in a voice that stayed even and quiet, like a man leading a prayer you can enter if you need to. Then it was my turn. I didn't have the polish. I had my teacher voice and my memory. I brought up Mrs. Larkin's stories and the children playing foursquare on the chalk-scarred entryway, and the quiet way the clinic nurses carried patients in their pockets like mints. I told them about the lighter and how we'd found it and what it had etched on it. I told them I loved the future as much as any man, but not at the price of trickery. I told them I would stay after any vote, lose or win, because this is my home, and my love for it isn't based on getting my way. The council members listened like people who have known both of us since we were old enough to run under those oaks. They shuffled their papers. They asked questions that were long and careful. They called a short recess that felt like a year. During it, Pell came up to me and said, "Soft enough? You think you've done something noble here, son?" "I think we've told the truth," I said. He leaned in. His breath smelled like peppermint. "Truth is a malleable thing in rooms like this, and oaks are patient," I said. "And neighbors remember." He smiled without warmth and brushed past, but for the first time since this began, I saw something that looked almost like fear in the corner of his eye. When the council came back, the first motion came from Councilwoman Ruiz, who has been appointed and reappointed since before my first car had working air conditioning. "I move we table the current plan," she said. "Pending investigation of possible conflicts of interest and pending a community-led revision that considers preservation of the centre and the oaks." And she paused and looked at me, then at Terrell, not with dislike, but with a kind of gentle insistence, and pending a code of ethics update for this body. The vote wasn't close. It was 6-1. Pell was the one. The room exhaled like one person. Some people clapped, some didn't. Some sat still, staring at their hands, thinking about what they might need to do tomorrow. Outside, the oaks did not nod or clap. They simply stood after. There were the parts of life that aren't dramatic, the putting away of chairs, the stacking of papers, the way Loretta found me and slipped me a styrofoam cup of coffee from a thermos she'd brought under her jacket, as if comfort is a contraband worth smuggling. People touched my arm. People told me stories about the centre one after another, the way they do when they're not yet ready to go home. Sheriff Dorset shook my hand and then did the same to Terrell. Pell stalked out with two men whose suits looked like armor. When the hall cleared, it was just the janitor with his rolling can, the mayor gathering her notes, and us. Terrell stood under the exit sign glow like a man trying to decide what he can leave with and what he must leave behind. "You were brave," I said. He shook his head. "I was late. Better late than letting something go that we can't get back," he finished, his voice a little cracked. He looked at me. Really looked. The kind of look you would expect from a man who has built things and knows which joints bear the weight. I didn't plan to do it. I didn't think I deserved to. But I stepped close and put my hand on his shoulder and felt the solid line of him. It felt like pressing my palm to something strong that has cracks you can trace if you want to be tender, and I wanted to be tender. He lifted his hand and set it lightly at my waist as if he was afraid he might startle me. He didn't. He couldn't. I was already startled by everything about him. We didn't kiss there either. We stood, and the standing felt like an answer. We walked out together into a cool evening that smelled like damp concrete and the first brave lilies. He walked me to my car like a teenager with good manners. I felt young and old in the same breath, aware of time like a solid thing that can both hold you and move around you if you let it. He cleared his throat. "Do you want to come by tomorrow morning?" he asked. I could use your help starting the revision. Not because I can't do it alone, because I'd like to do it with you." He colored a little and then laughed at himself. "That sounded like something else." "It did," I said. "But I liked how it sounded. We built something in the weeks that followed that looked a lot like a plan and a little like a life. The committee met in the gym under the mural of the river, where ducks forever fly into a painted sky. We argued like people who mean it and hug afterwards. He arrived with coffee and scones from the new bakery that hasn't yet found its footing, because supporting what is shaky is a way of being kind. I arrived with a binder of handwritten notes that would make a modern project manager cry, and he did not make me feel foolish for them. We listened to the PTA president and the retired coach and the young mom who drops her kid at the clinic for asthma treatments, and the man who cannot hear well anymore, but wanted us to know how bright the sunlight looks coming through the oaks on a late afternoon. We put more and more of those words into the plan. We also went for walks at dusk and counted lightning bugs and leaned against the fence at the Little League field and found excuses to brush hands. We touched in the careful, old-fashioned way that feels like an oath. He told me about his grandmother's sayings. I told him about my father's soft whistle when he could not find words. He looked beautiful when he laughed, not polished, just open, the way people look when they stop performing for a minute and let you in. The night we finally kissed, it was not fireworks. It was the quiet click of a door when you come home late and try not to wake anyone. We sat on my porch swing, the same one my father hung with a friend when I was 8, and we talked until the talk softened into something that felt like the space between words. He leaned in. I met him halfway. His mouth was warm and careful and told me something in a language I hadn't known I'd been waiting to speak. We pulled back and laughed a little, because that is what you do when you are shy and happy. He pressed his forehead to mine. We breathed. Some people did not like our plan. Some people did. Some people surprised themselves by crossing the street to speak to each other after years of shaking their heads from opposite porches. Pell resigned under weight he couldn't sweet-talk away. An investigation, quiet and professional, took what we found and set it into the kind of order that holds up under lights brighter than ours. The oaks were not cut down. The center was repaired, and months later renovated in ways that kept its heart. The clinic got a better waiting room and a wider hallway. The gym floor was refinished but not replaced, because some scuffs are history and deserve to remain. I have learned this. Love does not erase the things you fight about. It gives you the courage to fight better. Terrell and I argue still. We argue about whether a modern wing on the north side should have windows this big or that. We argue about whether a library needs rugs in reading nooks if the maintenance budget is thin. We argue about the word legacy. And when we do, I sometimes reach for his hand under the table, and he lets me hold it while we talk. We do not argue about the truth, we tell it. We tell it when it's simple, and when it feels like a stone we have to pick up even when we're tired. Sometimes at night, when the town settles and the freight train speaks in a long, low sound like a sigh, we sit on that porch swing, and I put my head on his shoulder and think about how strange it is that the person I once called my enemy now holds me every time I feel like I might break. We talk about small things, whose turn it is to bring snacks to the meeting, whether the dog from down the street has adopted us, and big things, how it felt to be wrong, how it feels to be forgiven. We talk about how the morning light looks when it hits the community center just right, making the freshly painted letters on its sign glow like a promise. We run into people in the grocery store who squeeze our arms and say, "You boys did good." And we thank them and do not argue with the term boys, because sometimes kindness comes wrapped in old habits, and sometimes that is all right. We take long drives on 2-lane roads just to remind ourselves the horizon is still there. We bring Loretta flowers on Saturdays. We visit the Veterans Center on Tuesdays and get roped into a chess game that makes Terrell curse under his breath and me grin. If I am telling this to you now, it's because of what I wish I could have told myself that first night with the note under my windshield. There will be people who try to scare you into quiet. There will be times you are tempted to let anger be your whole vocabulary because it is clean and it keeps you safe. There will be moments when you will meet someone you've decided is your enemy and discover a softness in them that confuses you and makes you want to throw up new walls. And then also, Strangely, set down your bricks. Don't be afraid to be surprised. Don't be afraid to listen even when your blood is up. Don't be afraid to hold a hand under the table. Don't be afraid of the word love, just because it arrived through a door you thought had been closed to you forever. We go to the oaks sometimes and sit with our backs against their trunks like schoolboys. They watch the town the way trees do, with patience, with a lack of hurry that instructs the rest of us. If you lean your head just right, you can hear something that sounds like water moving underground, even if it's only your own blood reminding you that you, too, are part of something that flows. Tonight, when the town sleeps and the streetlights throw their thin circles on the sidewalk, we will walk past the community center and check the locks, because old habits die slow and care dies slower. He will put his arm around me. I will set my hand on his back. We will stand quietly and look at what we have saved together and what we have built. Some nights I still feel the shadow of being alone. On those nights when I reach out, he is there, and his voice in the dark is a truth I carry like a candle. I didn't fall for Terrell cleanly, like lightning. I fell like a river changes its mind, gradual, stubborn, reshaping its banks, finding at last the place where it fits and keeps moving. He was my enemy once, because I made him the place where all my fear could rest. He is my love now, the place where my fear gets named and held until it quiets. The oaks still stand. The center still opens its doors. And when I say home, I mean more than one thing. I mean a town. I mean a room where people argue and then vote and then shake hands. I mean his shoulder. I mean the word we are learning slowly, together, without hurry. Us.